Hello, it's Drisk here and welcome to my best game of a letter, Arcade Edition, with this video being the letter D. I thought in this world of bombarded choice, it'd be fun to determine what would I choose if I could only have 5 games per letter per system, imagining I would have to discard all others. The purpose of this, of course, is to whittle down the best games for me personally that I actually love to play, not being constrained by those games most important in gaming history, games that I loved in the past or loved by most. My choices here may surprise you. They surprise me in this video as well, but they have been chosen from my heart as it is at this snapshot in time. However, it's my fondest hope, and really the point of these videos is it brings back some fond memories for you all and introduce you to some new games that perhaps you weren't aware of. So the next time you're looking at your fully loaded gaming retro lists, you give them a go. Now, as mentioned, this is letter D for the arcades. So without further ado, let us begin. Okay, for game number 5, I've chosen the modern classic, perhaps unknown to most. It is called Dirty Driving by Raw Thrills and was released in 2011. Now, this is a madcap off-road truck racer set in 14 deliciously mad, imaginative fantasy levels, such as the Brawlerseum and the Lost City, encountering T-Rexes running across giant spiders and yetis as you make your way through these great tracks. Now, the game basically mixes the madcap arcade racing of titles such as Hydro Thunder and cruising games with the concept of Mario Kart, of picking up power-ups. And that's not surprising because it's produced by Eugene Jarvis. Yes, he of Defender and Robotron 2084, and of course the Cruising USA games. And many of the team behind this worked on the game Hydro Thunder. Now, power-ups here are triggered by a satisfyingly large chrome lever that you pull on the arcade cabinet. And when you pull or yank the crank, as the game says, it will use the power-up that you've picked up. This is an exciting way of issuing out the weapons as you hurl out the mines or bring out the Gatling guns to take out the enemy. And that's what I love about this game. It's the frantic mania of arcade, full-on eye-melting action on display here. Now, I get it, it might not be to everyone's taste, with some people not liking the toy box arcade physics of the cruising games and those like it. But I personally love it, with it always making me beam from ear to ear whenever I play this game. Now, as you ride through the game, you also pick up cash to help pimp out your chosen ride. One of 10 great varying off-road vehicles. Then at the end of each race, you're given a chance to yank the crank to do a wheel of fortune to bring up a power-up for the next race. Of course, you've got to put in another credit to play that race. Thankfully though, all your pimped out vehicles and power-ups can be saved through a key card for next time you go to the arcade machine. Overall, this is one hell of a fun ride and worth tracking down if you're lucky enough to see it out in the wild for some full-on fun. Now, unfortunately, this is a game that you don't see out there very often, so unless Raw Thrills plan to do an arcade racing compilation, which please Raw Thrills, please do, the rest of us, the only way to play the game is to run it in the emulator Techno Parrot on a very, very powerful PC. Okay, let's go for my number 4, and I've gone for the 3D fighter Dead or Alive by Tecmo, released in 1996. Now, often this is unfairly labelled as the fighter with the bouncing boobs, but really this is one of the most accomplished fighters of this era, with great fluid movement, a nice array of attack moves and defence, and counter moves, doing grabs to take on the enemy, giving it such fantastic gameplay. There's also a nice array of well-balanced characters to choose from here, each with their own distinctive styles of play, giving you much to learn all the combos and moves. One of the characters as well is Ryu Hayabusa. Yes, he of Ninja Gaiden fame, which of course is a nice cool touch. Now, I had so much fun with this game on the Saturn port, and later there was a brilliant version on the Xbox original called Dead or Alive Ultimate, which has a remastered version of the Sega Saturn port and then its sequel, Dead or Alive 2. But today, outside of that port, there's only really the inferior PlayStation port to play the game, or of course you can play it on MAME, or even better, the Sega Model 2 emulator that can be shown on display here. So give this game a go and hopefully you'll find it as much fun as I do. MAME, incidentally, also has the Dead or Alive Plus Plus version of the game, which adds a few additional elements. Okay, let's go on to my number 3 game, and I've gone for Dynamite Cop by Sega and released in 1998. Known as Dynamite Decker 2 in Japan, this has you play 3 hardened heroes as you take on a band of pirate villains to rescue the president's kidnapped daughter. Now, in the first game, Dynamite Decker 1, or Die Hard Arcade as it was known in the West, they really took the scrolling beat 'em up further, taking ideas from Double Dragon and Golden Axe, and then they looked at how they could make it work in a 3D world, making full use of that extra dimension. Here though, in the sequel, they've learned and improved upon that even more with Mad Cat antics on display. What we have essentially here is a room by room fighter. You go up against a variety of imaginative enemies, do a nice array of moves and attacks much like 3D fighters of the day, and clear the room, moving on to the next. The smooth animations and variety of moves on display make a huge difference and really shows the beauty of 3D over 2D in this instance. In between certain sections, there's also a timed event where as you're running along a corridor, you're suddenly told to go left or down or some kind of move, and if you do it quickly enough, you do it successfully into the next section, diving under the door and taking out some of the enemies by surprise. However, if you do it incorrectly, you still get to the new room but make a right hash of it, banging into the door, leaving you open to attack for a few moments as the enemies all swarm around you. It's a nice touch that breaks up the action nicely. Alongside all of that, there's another great element, which is a wide array of impromptu weapons that you can pick up and use against the fighters. Your heroes are really a resourceful bunch, picking up everything and anything to gain an advantage over the enemies that surround them. One minute you're hurling arcade cabinets at them, or brandishing a phone, flailing out the whirling receiver to get a distant attack upon them. Hell, you can even brandish heads on spikes or French baguettes at your enemies, anything to help take them out. And this is what I love about the game. The 3D allows a dizzying array of animations and moves, but with the whole game always going for fun and humour above everything else, never taking itself too seriously. Now, ports wise, this only really saw a faithful port on the Dreamcast, meaning unless you were lucky enough like me to actually own a Dreamcast back in the day, you probably never even saw this game, especially given the limited run of the arcade original. Thankfully, as you can see here, the Model 2 emulator does an amazing job of emulating this arcade board, so it's well worth giving this gem a go today if you can. Okay, let's go on to number 2, and I've gone for Cave's 2010 absolute classic, Dodonpachi, released in 1997. Now, the title means literally Angry Leader B, and is a sequel to Donpachi, released in 1995. However, they've taken that original game and dialed it all up to 11. What we have here is, to many, the perfect and pinnacle vertical shooting perfection, with more bullets, more enemies, more levels, all hurled at you, all perfectly honed with balanced gameplay, a feat quite frankly not bettered by any of its sequels. Now, you can choose 3 distinct ships here and have a gun or laser selection, and then you're thrown into full-on action the moment your dropship puts you into battle. I guarantee you won't have a single second's let up. Now, what's amazing, despite all the countless enemies and complex bullet patterns being hurled at you, it never feels unfair in this game. There's always a way through that pattern, and it's really only your lack of skill or memory that causes you to die. Now, thankfully, the bullet upgrade path as well, you start off with really meaty weapons right at the beginning, and this rises up, quite frankly, to absolutely insane, allowing you to take out most of the hordes of countless enemies. There's also a nice variety of shot on display, with just pressing the button quickly giving you a normal rapid fire, or a concentrated shot if you hold down the fire button. Finally, the second button does a bomb shot, which is a more powerful weapon, taking out most of the enemies ahead of you, which is essential when you're caught in a bind. Now, along with these sumptuous graphics, the music is full on amazing as well, mixing great weird rock tracks, and the boss music sounds like it was lifted from the 1984 Dune film. It accompanies all the on-screen action perfectly and really does complete this overall game package for you. Now, the development team in Cave have made some of my favourite shooters of all time, particularly the people involved on this, and this is one of their best that they have ever done. Well worth tracking down and giving it a go. Now, back in the day there was a PlayStation 1 port that bizarrely had the limitation of the same ship chosen for player 2 if you were doing 2-player, but overall it's a solid port. Much better in my opinion is the Sega Saturn version, which is nigh on flawless conversion, and also adds a Sega original version alongside the arcade game with fewer bullets and more extensive levels. It also allows you to run extensive levels, but as you can see today you can play it in MAME as well, and it looks and plays perfectly. So give this title a go today. So that leaves me with my number one game choice, and yes, of course, it had to be Daytona USA, made by Sega and released in 1993. Now, admittedly in 1993 it was a limited Japanese release, with 1994 being its wider worldwide release. Now, what you have here is NASCAR racing mixed with Sega arcade perfection, taking your trusty number 41 Hornets car across 3 tracks of pure arcade racing adrenaline. Now, clearly the game is inspired by Tom Cruise's film Days of Thunder, which is effectively Top Gun meets NASCAR racing, and like in that film you have a helpful mechanic blurting out tips and howls of concern as you bust up his car. The first track you race on is a 3-7 speedway track, or beginner. This is a simple oval track and has you race around a whopping 39 other cars as you try to make the number 1 spot within 8 laps. This track is by far the most iconic, and despite its simplicity it's so much fun to play as you try to perfect each track, weaving in between all the cars with crashes happening all around you. It's also all set to the brilliant catchy music Rolling Start playing in the background. If you do crash, then the game has a great damage model where quickly you become all smashed up, and it definitely has an effect on your overall car's performance. Thankfully you can pit stop to repair if you have to. Now, the second track is the Dinosaur Canyon Advanced track. This is much more complex and interesting track to race on, having to do 4 laps against 20 cars. This is a lot more skilled though, requiring you to do really clever drifting around corners and intelligently race to do well on the track. The music here is another belter, being the tune Let's Go Away. Finally, the third track is the Seaside Street Galaxy, or Expert track. This is a really long and complex track, but well worth mastering, as there are some beautiful visual cues and standout moments as you race. There's loads to learn here though on the track, with having it multiple paths and extremely tough corners to negotiate. This time you only have to do 2 laps with only 30 cars on the track, but don't let that fool you. This track is long and arduous. This also has another great tune that plays in the background called Sky High, or Blue Blue Sky, which is another great tune to accompany the action. As you probably can tell, I love this game, and whilst I feel it's a little too hard once you get off the first track, I still find it's a game I never tire of playing, with it all being so much fun. Now, back in the day, the consoles only had the Sega Saturn port of the machine, meant that if you didn't have that console, you probably would have missed out. Still, the PC did have a solid port in 1996 as well, which improved the Saturn ports with higher res graphics and really was the best way and only way to play it up until the Sega Dreamcast version of the game called Daytona USA 2001, released in the end of 2000. Thankfully, years later on the Xbox 360 and PS3 era, a digital version of Daytona USA was re-released, and this works on the latest consoles as well. These versions are simply the best way to play it today, with butter smooth frame rates and high res versions of the graphics, meaning the game has never looked and played better. It all has online leaderboards and online play as well. Hell, it even has the karaoke mode. It is by far the perfect way to play this. Still, if you don't have that version, alternatively, as you can see here, is the Model 2 emulator, which does an excellent job as well. It's also in Arcade Club in all the venues, which have sit-down versions of the cabinet and 2-player, so there's no excuse not to retry this game again today. Okay, so that's my list, and I suspect it surprised you with me leaving some huge big hitters off my list here. Now, whilst I appreciate those games and their importance in video game history and how they're integral and beloved by so many people, including my own. I mean, I love these games in my past. But when I looked in my heart and what I actually played today, I found I don't play them as much. So I'm going to list a few of the big hitters here and the reasons why I didn't choose them before going on to some honourable, lesser known mentions. Okay, the first big hitter not on my list was Dig Dug, of course, by Namco. Now, I understand the love for it. I think the visuals and audio are great, but if I'm honest, I've never really got on with the gameplay that much. I just don't find it that much fun. Then we have Defender. Now, I get the love for this game, I get how it's iconic, but for me there's just too many buttons. There's one to reverse, one for thrust, one to fire, one to hyper jump, meaning I'm dead usually before I worked out the right button to press. I just find it so difficult to play. Having said that, when you see a good player that's mastered the game, you definitely see why it's so revered. Next we have Donkey Kong. Now this is important in so many ways through arcade gaming history, but I'm absolutely hopeless at the game. To be honest, I'm lucky to get off the first screen. I find the seemingly randomness of the barrels and the whole variety of enemies and sheer brutality of it all makes it so difficult, and it just leaves me cold and angry and frustrated whenever I try to play it. Then of course we've got Double Dragon. Now I adore this game, and for the longest time it was on my list. It's a game nostalgically I loved to the end of time. As a kid I played it to death, and also of course history wise it's absolutely undeniable. This is such an important step forward in the scrolling beat 'em up genre. I adore the visual look, I love the music, but playing it today and removing my nostalgic goggles for it, I just came to realise it doesn't grab me in the same way it used to, with quite frankly later games that have come taking what they've learned have really taken the genre forward. Then there's the game Darius, known for its opulent 3-screen shooter. Now I do get the love for this game as well, but I think there's so many better horizontal shooters out there in my opinion. Now alongside those big hitters, I know there were many more. I wanted to give some honourable mentions for lesser known games that I definitely think are worth a shout out. My first honourable mention is Capcom's Dungeons and Dragons Chronicles of Mystara. Now this took all they had learned from their other scrolling beat 'em up games such as Knights of the Round, and they've taken all of that to make a beautiful update to Sega's Golden Axe game in effect, in all but name, adding in upgrade and RPG elements. And in my view, with the gorgeous animations and graphics, this makes it one of the best scrolling beat 'em ups around. Another overlooked title today is Dynasty Warriors. No, not the 3D famous PS2 and later series that came out, but Capcom's 1989 arcade classic original. This is a surprisingly fun spin on the scrolling beat 'em up genre, putting on a horse with swarms of enemies. There's also amazing shooters on this letter which didn't make my list. There's Cave's 2008 Death Smiles, which is the Mega Black label, the one that I'm showing here. Now this is, as you can see, a stunningly beautiful game with impressive attack waves and all with the imaginative enemies and backdrops to shoot your way through. Other great shooters, Whale, worthy of mention is Darius Gaiden, Silver Hawk. Now this Taito shooter is the 5th in the series, and for me it's one of my favourites in that series. It all plays so well, and I love the trippy weird music mixed in with the crazy enemy designs, making this an absolute blast to play and definitely one of my favourites. Another interesting shooter is Capcom's Demahu. Now this is done by ex-Toplin Teams Rising, released in 2000. It is actually the 3rd in the series of their Mahou Daisakusen game series. This does, as you can see, an awesome update and well worthy to play today. Finally, there is the amazing shooter Dentai Twin B. Now I adore this vertical Konami shoot 'em up. It's so playable with awesome music and visuals, making this the ultimate update to that 1985 Konami original. There's great power-ups in the game, the levels are brilliantly designed, and it all draws me back to this game again and again. And to be honest, this was on my list for the longest time until my recent newfound addiction of dirty driving meant it just pipped it to the post. So there you go. There's my list. I appreciate it's a different list than many others would choose, but keep in mind this is my own personal thoughts and opinions. I'm not saying that these are the best games, just the games I enjoy the most for me. The simple truth though is I adore all these games I mentioned in their own way, and it was really tough whittling this down to just 5. Thank you for all your kind comments, thoughts and suggestions on the previous videos, and I definitely will play some of the games that you've mentioned. Well, there you go. Look out for letter E in my gaming series, and don't forget I'm also on the free podcast RGDS, or the Retro Gaming Discussion Show, as one of the hosts. And on that we go through chatting about all things retro. It's a fun blast and well worth having a listen to. So until next time, keep it retro.